West Papua, what is the Australian government's view of the recent situation, mass protests and violence in West Papua?
Just ask those officials to come to the table, Senator.
Thank you.
Julie Heckscher, Southeast Asia Division. Thank you for the question, Senator. The situation in the Papua provinces is, of course, extremely complex, and the exact circumstances of what has recently happened is still emerging. But what I can tell you is this. From about mid-August 2019, a short while ago, demonstrations by Indonesian Papuans took place in about half a dozen cities in Indonesia, following the racist treatment of Papuan students in Surabaya. And then following rioting, Indonesian authorities deployed additional security personnel and restricted internet access in Papua itself. Now, from early September, the situation appeared to have calmed somewhat, with minor sporadic demonstrations, largely without injury. But then on around 20th of September, protests resumed in parts of the Papuan provinces, and on 23rd of September in particular, they turned extremely violent. There were protests in the provincial capital Jayapura and the central highlands town of Wamena, leading to civilian and police military deaths. Our best advice, and this is what our embassy in Jakarta has supplied as well, is that in early October the total death toll for Jayapura and Wamena incidents stood at around 37. It's a little hard to get exact details. The victims included both non-Papuans and ethnic Papuan Indonesians. And in some places, Wamena, for example, it seems that the majority of those killed were non-Papuan Indonesians. Now, investigations are still considering. As I said, the exact sequence is a little unclear. But it seems that in Wamena at least, which is where the worst of the violence occurred most recently, the protesters appeared in front of the Wamena district office claiming a non-Indigenous Papuan teacher made racial slurs, and it descended into a riot. There are allegations that police shot into the crowd. Around 650 properties, shops and dwellings were reportedly set on fire, and people who were trapped inside those buildings were tragically perished. From what we can gather, in the weeks following those September riots, around 16,000 people, mostly non-Papuan, non-Indigenous Papuans, were evacuated. Some of them have begun to return. So those are sort of the key elements.
Sure. So what representations and at what level has the government made to the Indonesian government about the recent violence in West Papua?
So we have had lots of engagements with...
So just if you could tell me at what level?
Well, the Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister has spoken to the Indonesian government?
Yes. So the
President.
To the President. And was this matter raised in the recent trip?
Yes.
Of the Prime Minister?
Spoke to the President on the 20th of October.
Has the Australian government actually urged the Indonesian government to allow the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights to visit West Papua?
Yes is the answer. That, of course, the invitation was first made quite some time back, and at various points the Australian Embassy and the Australian Government generally has spoken to Indonesian authorities. We have consistently encouraged the Indonesian Government to allow access not just of the UN but of others, because this is a good way of showing what the situation is on the ground.
Recently, there were media reports that Indonesia had blocked British, Canadian and New Zealand diplomats from visiting West Papua, but that US and Australian diplomats had not sought access. So is that true, and does the government have plans to request access to West Papua for our diplomats?
Senator, we have sought access. Just because the media reports don't mention that we called for it. I would note that the Australian relationship with Indonesia is quite different than a number of other countries. It's stronger and closer, and we have a lot of ongoing engagement all the time with the Indonesian authorities. We are, I think, perhaps the only embassy that makes ongoing regular visits to Papua, because not least because we have development projects on the ground there. So for us the situation is a little different. We have made regular visits consistently. Certainly we also have not been able to make visits, but we have sought access, and we have, I myself recently requested access, but so has our embassy in Indonesia. We've sought a resumption of access as soon as the security conditions allow.
Okay. To what extent does Australia still fund the Jakarta Centre for Law Enforcement Cooperation, where the Indonesian police are trained?
We do still fund it. It is a long-standing enterprise between Australia and Indonesia. The JCLEC, if you'll permit, I'll sort of shorten it to that. It's in fact been one of the biggest success stories in regional subcrime efforts. It's been in
sorry,
place
I'm
for
just
some
time limited. Could you provide on notice details of the funding and what training occurs there?
Well, I can probably give that to you right now, Senator. So DFAT is providing up to $8.4 million under the Australia-Indonesia Partnership for Justice Phase 2 and the Maritime Capacity Building Initiative Development Programs. There is probably some additional assistance that is provided directly by, for example, the AFP and others, but within the Australian system, but I don't have all of those details. But certainly we support it very strongly and collaborate with Indonesia. It has not only built, strengthened law enforcement, counter-terrorism capabilities within Indonesia, but within the whole region.
So within that program, does Australia provide any counsel to trainees against human rights abuses?
I'm sure that's the case. I don't have the exact details here, but certainly a lot of what we do, both within JCLEC and elsewhere within the region, and this is largely within the within a different portfolio. It's really AFP, etc. A key part of what we do is actually capability building and cooperation and training on modern policing, modern counter-terrorism efforts, and part of that, I know from ongoing conversations with the AFB, involves general human rights training. Now, that's not a hard numbers and evidence base, but certainly that would be part of what we do.
And in light of the recent violence in West Papua, and that has included reports of Indonesian militia being organised by the Indonesian police and military, is the Australian government reviewing its commitment to provide support for the Indonesian police and military?
No,
and if not, why not?
No, Senator.
Why not?
Because this is an important engagement between Australia and Indonesia. While there are reports, my understanding is they are not verified as such, but I also note that while our protection of human rights remains a key focus, we also saw a statement from Indonesia's Chief of Police that some of the events to which you've referred and Ms Heckscher has referred would be investigated in relation to concerns around policing in cooperation with the Indonesian National Human Rights Commission itself. So while our long-term relationship with the Indonesian police and the program to which you refer is an important one, I also think that that statement is important in the context of the discussion around Papua.